Welcome to Life Turns, the place where real emotions, untold struggles, and shocking twists find their voice. Today's story is one that will pull at your heart, make you question loyalty, and remind you how fragile family ties can sometimes be. Imagine being just a teenager, thrown out of your home when you needed love the most, and then, 20 years later, the very same parents who disowned you show up, demanding rights to the child you fought so hard to raise. That's my life. And today, I'll share it with you. I was only in 10th grade when my world turned upside down. At 15, I was supposed to be worrying about exams, crushes, and hanging out with my friends. Instead, I was staring down 2 pink lines on a test I never imagined holding in my hands. Pregnant. That word hit me like a storm. I knew my life would change forever, but what I didn't know was just how cold my parents' love could turn. When I finally gathered the courage to tell them, I expected shouting, disappointment, maybe even anger. But I still believed they would hold me, remind me that I was their daughter, and no matter what, they would help me. Instead, I remember my father's face turning red, his voice cutting through me like glass as he said, "You're no daughter of mine." My mother didn't even look at me. She just whispered, "Pack your things," as if I was some stranger who had overstayed her welcome. That night, I left with nothing but a backpack, a broken heart, and the baby growing inside me. My best friend's family took me in for a while. They were kind, but I always felt like a burden. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mom and dad sitting at our kitchen table, eating dinner like I never existed. That pain became my fuel. I promised myself I'd raise my child, even if it killed me. The next months were the hardest I've ever known. I juggled school while hiding my belly, scared of whispers and cruel jokes. Some teachers looked at me with pity, others with judgment. But the moment I felt my son kick for the first time, all the shame disappeared. For the first time since that awful night, I smiled. He gave me strength. When my son was born, I named him Ethan. Holding him in my arms, I swore I'd give him the love I was denied. I worked 2 jobs while finishing school. There were nights I cried myself to sleep from exhaustion, but every morning I woke up to Ethan's little hands reaching for me. That kept me going. Years passed, and slowly, I built a life. I graduated, found a steady job, and eventually started my own small business. Ethan grew into the kind of boy any parent would be proud of, kind, respectful, and hardworking. He had my smile but his father's eyes, though his father was long gone, never stepping up, never once calling to check if we were okay. It was just us. Me and Ethan against the world. I thought I had left the pain of my parents behind, buried in the past. But life has a cruel way of reopening old wounds. Last month, out of nowhere, I received a letter. At first, I thought it was junk mail. But when I opened it, my knees nearly gave out. It was from my parents' lawyer. After 20 years of silence, they were suing me for custody of my son. At first, I laughed. It had to be a mistake. Why would the people who abandoned me when I needed them most suddenly want Ethan? But as I read further, the laughter died in my throat. They claimed I was unfit to raise him, that my past decisions proved I was irresponsible, and that Ethan deserved the stable family environment they could now provide. Stable? My parents had built a fortune over the years. They were wealthy, respected in the community, people saw them as the perfect couple. But I knew the truth. Behind their polished smiles was the same cruelty that once threw me out like trash. Now, they were trying to steal the very thing that saved me, my son. I didn't tell Ethan right away. He was preparing for college, excited about the future. I didn't want to burden him with the ugliness of my past. But secrets have a way of spilling. One evening, he found the letter in my room. His face went pale, his hands trembling as he asked, "Mom, is this real?" I wanted to protect him, but I couldn't lie. I nodded. He hugged me so tight, tears falling on my shoulder. "They don't get to take me. You're my mom. You've always been my mom." Hearing him say those words gave me courage, but it also broke my heart. My child, who deserved nothing but peace, was now caught in the crossfire of a war he never asked for. The court date is coming soon. My parents walk into the courtroom with expensive lawyers and smug confidence, while I walk in with nothing but the truth and the son I raised with my blood, sweat, and tears. I don't know how this battle will end, but I know one thing: I will never stop fighting for Ethan. Because 20 years ago, they disowned me. But I will never disown him. Walking into that courtroom for the first hearing, I felt like that same 15-year-old girl again, the one who stood in front of her parents, begging them to see her, begging them not to throw her away. But this time was different. I wasn't just a scared teenager anymore. I was a mother. A woman who had built a life from nothing. I wasn't going to let them take from me the one thing I had fought so hard to keep. Still, I would be lying if I said I wasn't terrified. Their lawyer was sharp, confident, and ruthless. He stood up and painted me as a reckless girl who had ruined her own life. He spoke about my pregnancy at such a young age as though it was a crime, as though bringing Ethan into the world was a mistake. He twisted every hardship I endured into proof that I was unstable. The worst part? My parents sat there, nodding along, acting like they had no choice but to step in and save their grandson. When it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled, but I forced myself to look at the judge and tell my truth. I told him about the night I was disowned, about leaving home with nothing, about building my life brick by brick. I didn't sugarcoat my struggles, because I knew my story wasn't perfect. But I wanted the judge to see that despite everything, I had given Ethan a home filled with love. I wanted him to know that my mistakes didn't define me, my choices did. Ethan was allowed to testify too, though I begged him not to. I didn't want him to feel pressured. But he insisted. When he stood in front of that courtroom, tall and confident, I couldn't stop my tears. My little boy, the baby I once carried in my arms, now stood there defending me. He looked directly at my parents and said, "You weren't there for her. You weren't there for me. She raised me alone, and she gave me everything you didn't. I don't need saving. I already have a family." His voice didn't shake once. The judge listened carefully, but court battles are never that simple. Weeks dragged on with endless paperwork, witnesses, and accusations. My parents dug up every detail of my past they could find. They even tried to use the fact that I worked multiple jobs against me, saying it meant I couldn't give Ethan enough attention. They hired people to testify about how difficult my teenage years had been. It was like they wanted to erase 2 decades of sacrifice and focus only on the moment my life went off track. At night, after long days in court, Ethan and I would sit on the couch, exhausted. Sometimes, we didn't even speak. We just held hands, watching TV without really seeing it, knowing that in a few days, we'd be back under those harsh lights, facing the people who had once been my parents. I could see the stress wearing on him, but he never once complained. He never once made me feel like this was too much. He was my rock, just as I had always tried to be his. One evening, something happened that shook me to my core. My mother called. After 20 years of silence, her voice came through the phone. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask about my life. She simply said, "This doesn't have to be messy. If you just agree to let us take Ethan, we'll make sure you're taken care of financially." I froze. Money. That was all she thought I cared about. She thought she could buy my silence, my surrender, the same way they had bought everything else in their lives. I hung up without a word. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. Not because I was tempted, but because it proved what I already knew: they didn't want Ethan out of love. They wanted him as a trophy. A way to cover the stain of what they had done to me, to rewrite history and look like the generous grandparents who rescued their grandson. The thought of Ethan being raised in that cold, loveless house made me sick. I knew then, more than ever, that no matter what it took, I had to win. The trial became the talk of the town. People who had once judged me for being a teen mom suddenly whispered words of support. Old friends reached out, telling me they admired my strength. Some even admitted they wished they'd stood up for me back then. But the most important support came from Ethan. He reminded me daily why we were fighting. He reminded me that we weren't alone, that no amount of money or power could erase the bond we had built. Then came the most painful day of the trial. My parents took the stand. My father, who had once told me I was no daughter of his, now pretended to cry as he spoke about how much he loved his grandson. He said they regretted losing time with Ethan, as if they were victims of circumstance instead of the architects of their own choices. My mother nodded beside him, her face painted with sorrow, her hands wringing a tissue she didn't even use. Watching them lie so easily, so convincingly, nearly broke me. But then, something unexpected happened. The judge asked them a direct question: why did you cut off your daughter when she was only 15 and needed you most? For the first time, they stumbled. My father muttered about discipline and standards, but the judge pressed further. The truth slipped out, that they were ashamed of me, that they worried about their reputation, about what the neighbors would say. And in that moment, their mask cracked. It was the first time I felt like the judge truly saw the difference between us. They had chosen pride over love, appearances over family. I had chosen my son every single day for 20 years. I held on to that moment like a lifeline, even as the trial dragged on with more twists and turns. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself reflecting on everything I had endured. The nights of hunger, the years of struggle, the loneliness of raising a child alone, it had all led me here. And though I was scared, I realized something powerful. No matter what the court decided, my son already knew the truth. He knew who had been there for him, who had sacrificed for him, who had loved him without condition. And that, I thought, was something no one could ever take away. The final day of the trial felt heavier than all the others combined. I woke up before the sun, sitting quietly at the edge of my bed, staring at the worn family photo I had kept hidden in a drawer for years. In that picture, I was a little girl smiling between my parents, before life turned cruel and their love disappeared. Now, decades later, we were no longer family, we were enemies fighting in a courtroom over the one person who gave my life meaning. My heart pounded as I whispered to myself, for Ethan. Just for Ethan. When we walked into the courtroom, the air was tense. Reporters sat in the back rows, notebooks ready. Neighbors, curious and restless, had filled the benches, eager to see how the scandalous family feud would end. My parents looked polished, dressed in expensive suits, their lawyer by their side like a soldier ready for battle. I had no designer clothes, no powerful attorneys. All I had was my truth, and my son sitting beside me, squeezing my hand for courage. The closing arguments began. Their lawyer stood tall, painting a picture of my parents as loving, responsible figures who only wanted the best for their grandson. He spoke with authority, his words dripping with sympathy, as if they were heroes swooping in to save a boy from a broken home. My parents nodded along, their faces carefully composed, as though they were saints sacrificing everything out of love. It was a performance, and for a moment, I worried the judge might believe it. Then it was my turn. My lawyer wasn't flashy, but she believed in me. She walked to the center of the room and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," she began, "this case is not about wealth, or reputation, or appearances. It's about love. 20 years ago, when this young mother needed her family, they turned their backs. They left her alone to face the world with a child in her arms. And despite all odds, she rose above it. She raised a boy who is standing here today as proof of her sacrifice, her strength, and her love. That is not the mark of an unfit parent. That is the mark of a mother." As she spoke, I couldn't stop the tears running down my cheeks. I saw Ethan glance at me, his eyes shining, and I realized that even if we lost, even if the judge ruled against us, I had already won something far more important. I had given my son the kind of love my parents had never given me. When the judge finally spoke, the silence was unbearable. He looked at my parents first, then at me. His voice was steady, but each word felt like a hammer striking the room. I have listened carefully to both sides. This case is not about rewriting history, but about the best interest of Ethan. He is nearly an adult, intelligent, and capable of expressing his own wishes. It is clear that his mother has provided him with a stable and loving home, despite the challenges she faced. Therefore, the petition for custody is denied. The room erupted in whispers. My parents' faces fell, their polished masks cracking with disbelief. For the first time, I saw panic in their eyes. But all I could feel was relief so overwhelming that my knees almost gave out. Ethan wrapped his arms around me, whispering, "We did it, Mom. We did it." Walking out of that courtroom, the cameras flashed, voices shouted, but I didn't care. All I saw was the boy I had raised, the boy they tried to take, smiling at me with pride. In that moment, the years of pain, rejection, and struggle melted away. I had stood up to the people who once controlled my life, and I had won. Not just in court, but in every sense that mattered. But the story didn't end there. A week later, I received a letter, not from lawyers this time, but from my parents themselves. It was handwritten, shaky, almost desperate. They begged for forgiveness, saying they had made mistakes, that they just wanted to be part of Ethan's life before it was too late. I sat with that letter in my hands for hours, torn between the part of me that still craved their love and the part of me that remembered every scar they left. I showed the letter to Ethan. He read it carefully, then looked at me with wisdom far beyond his years. "Mom," he said softly, "you don't owe them anything. They made their choice a long time ago. But maybe, for your heart, you can forgive them. Not for them, for you." His words hit me like lightning. He was right. Forgiveness didn't mean letting them back in. It meant letting go of the hold they had on my soul, so I wrote back. I told them I forgave them, but that forgiveness did not mean access. Ethan was not a prize to be claimed. He was my son, my heart, and his choice would always come first. If someday he wanted to meet them, that would be his decision, not mine. For the first time in 20 years, I felt free. Today, Ethan is preparing for college. He dreams of becoming a lawyer, inspired by the trial we survived together. I couldn't be prouder. We still face challenges, life is never easy, but we face them together. And every time I look at him, I'm reminded of the promise I made all those years ago, that no matter what, I would never leave him. So if you're listening to my story and you feel abandoned, broken, or unloved, remember this: family isn't always the people who share your blood. Family is the ones who stand by you when the world turns its back. Sometimes, that's a friend, a partner, or even just the child who holds your hand and tells you they believe in you. That's what I learned the hard way. And that's the lesson I hope you carry with you. Because 20 years ago, I was a girl thrown out into the dark, terrified and alone. But today, I am a mother who stood her ground, who fought for love, and who won. Not just in court, but in life. And no lawsuit, no betrayal, no amount of money will ever take that victory away.